Kids will end their lives. Anti-trans legislation is impacting mental health in the Gulf South. No bias there. Biography examines how systemic racism shaped the troubled life of George Floyd. Nobody has to take responsibility. It's systemic racism. Here's another that came from WRKF. Christian nationalism support is strongest in rural conservative states. Another, Dr. Rachel Levine, focused on her job at HHS. Still, anti-trans politics followed her. The people who wrote these articles and the people who published these articles have every right to do that. I mean, I'm a firm believer in the First Amendment. Without the First Amendment, how are we supposed to know who the idiots are? I support the First Amendment.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I've got something pretty important to talk about today, and it's something that should make every true American sit up and think. We're diving into a bold stance that Senator John Kennedy just took on federal funding for NPR PBS and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and I'm telling you folks, as a patriotic American who cares about the future of our country, this is a conversation we need to have. So let's talk about it. Let's get into it.
I've talked, and I'm not going to repeat, I've talked a lot about the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and its two cousins, National Public Radio and PBS. The United States taxpayers spend $500 million a year subsidizing these media organizations. I've talked about that. There was a time when maybe we needed to do that, back in the 40s and the 50s, when we only had 3 TV stations and a handful of radio stations. It might have been necessary for the government to get in the TV and radio business, particularly to help our citizens in rural areas. But those days are gone. Now there are all kinds of forms of media. We've got TV, newspapers, radios, we've got the internet, we've got Facebook, we've got blogs, we've got podcasts, we've got cable TV, we've got streaming TV. But yet, the government continues to spend $500 million a year to subsidize the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the National Public Radio, and PBS. And it ought to stop. It ought to stop. President Trump's talked about it. Many members of Congress have talked about it. I've talked about it on the floor of the Senate. Now, some of my colleagues say the reason it ought to stop is because the so-called journalism being published by NPR and PBS, which get their money from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which gets its money from you, out of your pocket, $500 million a year. Some of my colleagues said, well, we ought to stop it because the reporting is biased. And they've marshaled a persuasive argument to that effect. I mean, I've talked about some of the articles that have appeared paid for with the American people's tax dollars. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll just mention a couple. Here's one: How Racism Became a Marketing Tool for Country Music. That's pretty fair and balanced, huh? Here's another one: The Hidden Racism of Young White Americans. AP fact check: Trump seeds race animus with COVID falsehood. Here's another one: Biden trumpets economic gains but struggles to get credit. Here's another one: Democracy on Trial, Part 1, a blueprint for the case against Trump. It's paid for with your tax dollars. This is opinion journalism. But it's not just at the national level. It's in my state, too. It's in Louisiana. Louisiana has 318 radio stations. Only 10 of them get money from federal taxpayers through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So the folks who are publishing the articles I just referenced are picked 10 out of 138 in Louisiana and said, we're going to favor you and give you money. My state also has 48 TV stations. 8 of them get federal money, your dollars. I don't know what the other ones did not to get federal money, but clearly this is a case of the federal government picking and choosing. Let's see what they've done with the money. Let's take this down. Put up the local ones, John. I'll just read you a couple of the headlines paid for with your dollars in my local public media organizations. How illegitimate critical race theory concerns shaped Louisiana's new social studies standards. No bias there. Trump's anti-trans effort is an agenda cornerstone with echoes in history. No bias there. That came from NPR and one of my local stations. Here's another. What it's like to choose transgender sex reassignment surgery. Another. Transgender boy tells mom it shouldn't be scary to be who we are. Here's another one. This came from WRKF, which also it's one of the 10 out of 138 radio stations that the bureaucrats at CPB look with favor on. Kids will end their lives. Anti-trans legislation is impacting mental health in the Gulf South. No bias there. Biography examines how systemic racism shaped the troubled life of George Floyd. Nobody has to take responsibility. It's systemic racism. Here's another that came from WRKF. Christian nationalism support is strongest in rural conservative states. Another, Dr. Rachel Levine, focused on her job at HHS. Still, anti-trans politics followed her. Here's another one by WRKF. Another example of opinion journalism paid for with your taxpayer dollars. These far-right media figures are getting center stage under Trump. Let me see another one, John. But there's more, as they say on The Price is Right, or something like that. Here's another one. This came from Louisiana Public Broadcasting. Becoming Papa, father's key to gender justice. I can tell you that every mom and dad in Louisiana, when they lie down to sleep at night, and they can't, they're lying there worried about gender justice. Not. I mean, the article, the title of the article suggests what you ought to believe. That's not fair or balanced. Here's another one. Transgender athletes seek protections to play sports. Let me see the next one, John. Put that one up for me. This is John Lowry, who works with me. He's a fine American. I love this one. This is from one of my local radio stations in Louisiana. Arguments that trans athletes have an unfair advantage lack evidence to support. What planet did this reporter parachute in from? He or she really believes that men don't have a physical advantage over a woman in sports? Here's another headline. Trump embodies nearly every aspect of a racist, author says. Another, The Nation, confronting Trump's coded racism. This is coming from my local TV and radio stations that get money from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Here's another one. Sexism is out in the open in the 2016 campaign. That may have been inevitable. I wonder who the author of this piece voted for. Here's another one. Is Trump really that racist? I wonder who that reporter voted for.
As you just heard, Senator Kennedy has been making some huge waves in Washington, calling out the U.S. government for continuing to spend $500 million every year on media organizations like NPR, PBS, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Yeah, you heard that right. $500 million. Now, let's take a second to think about this. The government, our taxpayer dollars, are being funneled into outlets that many of us already know are pushing a liberal agenda. Not just any agenda, but a biased agenda. A left-wing, progressive, woke narrative that doesn't represent the hardworking, everyday Americans who are funding this nonsense. I mean, think about it for a second. We've got $36 trillion in debt. That's trillion with 80 trillions of dollars of debt hanging over our heads, and yet we're still spending taxpayer money to fund media outlets that are full of political bias and opinion journalism. Doesn't that just blow your mind? Senator Kennedy is right when he asks, what in the world are we doing with our country's future? And let's not beat around the bush here. This isn't just about funding the media. It's about the content they produce. As Senator Kennedy pointed out, just look at the headlines. Headlines like, racism became a marketing tool for country music, or, the hidden racism of young white Americans. These aren't just news reports. These are opinion pieces that push a very specific agenda. Now, don't get me wrong, these media outlets have every right to say whatever they want. But not at the expense of American taxpayers. You and I, we're footing the bill for this garbage. We're paying for media that often seems more concerned with pushing the left's agenda than telling us the truth. And let's talk about local media, folks. I'm from a small town, and Kennedy's point about Louisiana really hit home for me. There are 318 radio stations in Louisiana, and only 10 of them get taxpayer funding. Why are those stations getting the money and not the others? It's all about government control. It's about who gets to decide which voices are heard and which ones are silenced. And we're not even talking about small amounts of money here. This is $500 million a year. That's a lot of taxpayer dollars going to fund biased reporting. Look at some of these examples Kennedy shared. You've got headlines like, Trump's anti-trans agenda, and anti-trans legislation harming mental health in the Gulf South. These aren't just news stories. These are opinions. And what's even more frustrating is that the people in power have decided that it's our job to pay for it. I'm sorry, but I do not want my tax dollars going to fund a media machine that pushes divisive left-wing narratives that only serve to stir up anger and division in our country. Let's be clear here. This isn't about censorship or silencing free speech. This is about the government overstepping its bounds and using our money to fund media outlets that do not represent all Americans. That's what we've got to remember. In a country as diverse as ours, all voices should have a chance to be heard. But instead, we have certain media outlets that receive special treatment, all while they're pushing a narrow, progressive agenda. Senator Kennedy is absolutely right when he says we shouldn't be picking winners and losers. If we're going to fund public media, it should be for everyone equally. And we shouldn't be funneling taxpayer money into organizations that are so clearly biased and one-sided. Let's take a step back and think about this. With $36 trillion in debt, do we really want to keep throwing money into a bottomless pit of media bias? Do we want to keep subsidizing organizations that don't reflect our values and are too often working against the principles that built this great nation? Absolutely not. It's time for us to stand up. We cannot sit idly by while the government continues to waste our hard-earned money on biased media. It's time to push for a change. It's time to stop funding the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, NPR, PBS, and other outlets that receive taxpayer money and use it to push their liberal agenda. If you're with me, let's raise our voices. Let's call for an end to this wasteful spending. Let's demand that our government focus on real issues, not subsidizing media outlets that divide us. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. Should the government continue funding biased media? Or is it time to cut the cord and let these organizations stand on their own? I want to hear from you. Until next time, keep fighting for the values that make America great. God bless America and God bless you all.